a bit about me. So I run an online training consultancy and neurocoaching. It actually started, I do face-to-face and online. The online went live 2017, fortunately. And the online platform is known as the Mindsight Academy. So our main focus is really helping leaders and organizations drive behavior change by understanding how the brain works and really being able to maximize that knowledge to bring about high performance, which, really helps people work together as a team, helps people to be more effective as leaders, make the right decisions by understanding exactly how our brain drives our actions and behaviors. Because once you understand this, you get the best out of yourself and out of others. So my whole thing is really helping organizations to become more human so that people realize that you're dealing with human beings. And that way you actually find that you do get the best out of people. So my main website is my name, maureenchiana.com, and then the online academy is the Mindsight Academy. And the whole leadership concept is based on this, NeuroReact. And the R is Rewire for success, which we're going to be looking at a lot today, emotional stability, which brings about talking about the whole well-being, mental well-being and emotional well-being and the impact it has. The ability to adapt, to change and build resilience, or just being flexible. Why are some people flexible and some are not? And just being able to understand the brain in terms of flexibility. And then the C is connecting. So that's the connection, building positive relationships, and then transformation, which is, brings I say it kind of accumulates everything together, whereby you then are able to have sustained change. So that's the whole concept of the NeuroReact framework. But we're going to kind of look at this in a bit more detail today. The benefits of this is, like I say, it's using the power of neuroscience to enhance leadership and performance. So, the adaptability, bringing organizations to be more human, and how to communicate more effectively with people. And, I'm going to explain that a bit as we go along. So starting off now, I will just start with these questions. Which of these resonates with you? I agonize over what decisions to make. I take it personal when I'm rejected. I have a lot of ideas of what I want from my career or job, but I don't know how to make it happen. Never, always, should, must dominate my thinking or even my language. And then I feel uncertain and worry that life will pass me by. Do any of these resonate with you? If it does, just pop it into the chat. The first two, okay, interesting. Thanks, Liz. Liz has joined. Right, okay, I'm gonna keep my eye there, but let's look at this. I want you to look at this screen and fix your eyes on the black dot to your left. So the black dot to your left, just keep your eyes on it and just tell me without looking to your right, where you feel that the diagram on the right is going, or the object on the right is going. Is it going up or down or diagonally? While just fixing your eyes on that black spot. So fix your gaze on the black spot and just tell me what you're thinking. What direction is the object on the right moving? Diagonal. You can come up, you can unmute.
Diagonal. Yeah, sort of.
Diagonal.
Yeah.
Diagonal.
Yeah, diagonal.
Quite a few diagonals. Okay.
And a bit around.
In a circle.
And you think it's going around. Yeah. It's actually going up and down. So if you now if you look at that object now and actually trace it with your finger, you see that it's actually going up and down.
I do see that.
Yeah, so I love this visual illusion. I just love it so much. But it kind of just shows you how we can have misperceptions about things, because while we are looking at one thing, it's kind of making us feel that something else is happening. And it actually gives us a false impression about experiences that we face. So, and I'm going to link back to that as we go along. So several studies have shown that fewer than 10% of business teams can truly be considered high performance, and some 40% are largely dysfunctional, which ends up destroying the motivation of people and also engagement. The remaining 50% perform marginally, but never producing more than mediocre results. And that is quite steep. And it actually says a lot about what happens a lot in the workplace sometimes. Also, another research shows that 46% of new employees fail during the first 18 months to reach their anticipated potential, while only 19% achieve unequivocal success. And a lot of this is actually not because of skills, but poor interpersonal skills dominate this list, which links us back to what we're really going to be looking at, which is emotional intelligence. So I'm going to go quickly into emotional intelligence. We've all heard about it. We've all talked about it, but I'm going to link it to what I consider to be the essence of what emotional intelligence means. So emotional intelligence is the capacity to recognize and control your emotions and behavior whilst being aware of how they impact and affect those around you. So the key thing is the capacity to recognize and control emotions. The question is, why is that important? So just looking at the definition of emotional intelligence, and quickly, it has these main domains. There are 5 domains. The first 3 are really to do with you as a person. So those are intrapersonal. So self-awareness, self-management, self-motivation, which really starts, as I talked about leadership. Leadership starts with you as a self-leader. The same thing with emotional intelligence, it starts with you first. Because if you're not aware of yourself first, it'll be difficult to really understand other people. Then it comes to the interpersonal relationship, which is between people. So linking back to that definition of emotional intelligence, this quote by Aristotle says, anyone can become angry, that's easy. But to be angry with the right person to the right degree, at the right time, for the right purpose, and in the right way, that's not easy. And that's emotional intelligence. It's that ability to really be in control, to be aware, to be in control. And it doesn't mean that this won't happen, you won't get angry, but it's able to really, pick yourself up, even in the middle of losing it completely, to suddenly go, oh, what's going on here? And bringing yourself back. And just quickly, I'm going to go into my favorite friend here, just quickly, and just describe why emotional intelligence is so important. So we've got our brain. We all have one. Very complex organ, very, very smart, and can be a problem as well. But inside the brain, right in the middle of the brain, right deep inside our brain, we've got the emotional center of the brain. And the main organ, which we're going to be really talking about, is the amygdala. The amygdala is the emotional organ of the brain, the main one. And what happens is that the amygdala really links closely with our prefrontal cortex, which is that part of our brain, so that when information comes in through our different senses, it goes straight to the amygdala to scan it, to actually see what kind of information this is. And then what the amygdala is then doing is thinking about the brain. The function of the brain really is to really protect us, to keep us safe. So what the amygdala is doing is this a threat to you? Or is this something that is a reward to you? That's all it's doing. And if the amygdala then perceives that that information or whatever it is a threat, then it kicks off our flight, or freeze mechanism to then protect us from that information or that whatever that is. So, and in doing that, what that does is that it then activates what we call our stress response system. Because if the amygdala is constantly in that loop of being in threat, that is what leads to stress. Because the main thing that, for those that have listened to my talk, you remember that I said that when the amygdala or the emotional part of the brain is activated, especially when you have an amygdala hijack. The amygdala hijack is when it literally hijacks the rest of the brain. And the first place it hijacks is the prefrontal cortex. And why that's important is that the prefrontal cortex, like you see here, the frontal part is the executive part of the brain, where we make decisions, where we're able to solve problems. Our cognitive, really, the cognitive part of our brain that really enables us think and do things. So, and that's the first place it actually deactivates. So it takes the oxygen from that part of the brain, because when you think about it, when you're in danger, for example, if something like, you're confronted with something really dangerous like a lion or snake, for me, the last thing you want to be doing is standing there admiring it. Is it pretty? Is it green? Is it nice? What does it look like? That's the last thing you want to do. So when you're in danger, the last thing you want to do is to stand there thinking. What you want to do is take action. And that's where the amygdala hijack comes in. So it literally hijacks the brain and prevents you from that, prevents you from being able to make any conscious decision. And I use the example of when you prepare and go for an interview and you're really stressed. You can end up going there and just going blank, or you're doing a presentation and suddenly you're so nervous that you forget everything. That's, you're having an amygdala hijack. And because what's happened is that the prefrontal cortex has been shut down. So that is why emotional intelligence is important, because what you're trying to do is to control or be intelligent, make that emotional part of the brain. You're trying to control that emotional part of the brain so that it doesn't hijack the rest of your brain. It doesn't hijack your behavior, because what it then does is that when it hijacks, it takes control and starts processing the information relative to that, and then you're then going to take an action. And always related to, see, an example, and this is one example is you have a thought, the thought creates an emotion, the emotion then enables you to take an action. That action, as you keep taking that action over a period of time, becomes a behavior and then becomes a habit, and then you call it your personality. So that's just one example of how emotions are so powerful. And it brings us back to when you have a thought, that thought is creating an emotion, and it's that emotion that then leads to the action. And it's also important when goal setting, and everything comes back to that emotional part of the brain. And that's why it's so important to be able to control it. The emotional part of the brain is known as the limbic system, and it just comprises of the amygdala and the hippocampus as well. But we're not talking about, we'll talk about the hippocampus hopefully next time. So that's it in summary. Does anyone have any questions so far, or even comments on the emotional part of the brain and linking it to emotional intelligence? So, and honestly, please come off mute if you need to, because if not, all you will do this evening is hear my voice. So Robin, so is awareness of your own survival response the start of changing your action? Absolutely, yes. Because once you are aware of basically what your brain is doing, it's there for survival. So if I'm having these thoughts that this interview I'm going for, I'm not going to get it, is that really true? Because immediately that starts creating negative emotions. And one thing about our subconscious brain in particular, which I'm going to talk about here actually, this iceberg just symbolizes the brain. So it symbolizes the conscious part of the brain, which is the observed, which then is the observed behavior, which is our conscious brain. And the subconscious part of the brain, which is the part of the iceberg that is not seen. The subconscious part of the brain is where everything literally is stored. And that's what the amygdala is scanning when information comes in. So that's where information that you've taken in from when you were young to when, things you've observed over life or your experiences are all stored. So your values and beliefs, your experiences, genetic traits, and cultural background. So what it then does, and what the amygdala is then doing is scanning here to then see if there's anything similar that is already stored in the brain. And if there is, then it uses that information. So if what is already stored in the brain are limiting thoughts, fear, worry about different situations. For example, for me, one typical example is I cannot stand rats. That's one big thing. And that is imprinted in my unconscious brain. So if a rat comes here, without me even thinking, in fact, if something moves, my subconscious brain will immediately go, that could be a rat. And I'll literally be out of here. So, and for everyone, it's so different. So it's really trying to identify what is in our subconscious brain. Is it real? Is it true? Is it what I really believe? Because from when we were children, the brain was literally taking in information passively without us even doing anything. And that information is in the brain and stored in our brain. So we now, with knowledge and information, can start scanning our brain or paying attention to actually ask ourselves the question, is this true? Is this real? Is this perceived? And that's the whole essence of emotional intelligence. So Dina said, I'm terrified of bugs, even though I know it's not rational. Exactly.
They're the only thing smaller than me. It makes no sense, but I can't help it. I freak out.
But my son is so big. My son is 6'3", and he cannot stand bees. So even a fly going past him, especially in the summer, you see him literally run. And it's just not rational. But that's a fear that we've cultivated over time. So the question now is it something you want to keep, or is it something you want to change? And it varies for different situations.
Maureen, are you okay if anyone wants to unmute and ask a question? Like Liz, do you want to unmute? And that way we can get a conversation going as well.
Sure. There was 2 slides ago, Maureen, and you were talking about the different parts of the brain. And, I kind of feel like there's this trend. I don't know if other people are feeling this, of kind of separation. And I know that that's how you can get someone to go into a state of fear, is you separate them from the tribe. And I feel like there's this sensation going on, and I could be projecting, of separation, and it felt like that was like the limbic love system. I don't know, it triggered something, and I just kind of wanted to go, huh.
Yeah, a great question, Liz. And I'm going to come to it in about 3 slides down. So great question. So these are the emotions, a lot of the emotions that we experience over time. But this is something that I just find so powerful. Successful organizations have one major attribute which separates them from unsuccessful organizations: emotional intelligence. And you can see on the tree, decision-making, change, teamwork, all that. Really, with emotional intelligence, you're able to achieve those. So I'm going to go quickly because I really want to get to what the question Liz asked, because that is really the crux of what we're discussing today. So there's a brain mapping diagnostic that I use when I work with anyone. In fact, it's the first thing that I do, whether for organizations, teams, individuals, I use it. And the essence of it is really looking at the different parts of the brain. The brain is so interconnected. When we say right brain, left brain, they really work so closely together. So there's no one part or the other that, that has exclusive function for anything. But there are parts of the brain that have more neurons for specific functions. So if those neurons fire over a long period of time, or for repeatedly, then you tend to get an enhanced behavior pattern that exhibits. And the reason I love this diagnostic is that it's looking at behavior patterns, not personality. Because with personality profiles in particular, you kind of do it and then people believe that, okay, that's the way I am. So that's me, I can't change, that's it. But that's not how we are. Our brain can keep adapting and changing based on the firing and wiring that is coming to it. So what we actually exhibit is a behavior pattern which we can change. And that's the control part that we have that a lot of people don't use. So in essence, the frontal right part of the brain, which is that green bit, so that's the frontal right part here, really it has a lot of dopamine receptors. So when people use that over a repeated period of time, you tend to find that the dopamine is increased. So they are more flexible, they can be more creative, more spontaneous. And also you tend to find that they like change, they embrace change quite easily and get bored easily. While the blue, which is the bottom right part of the brain, has more estrogen. So that when people fire that a lot, what you then find is someone that is very into really caring about others, really looking at helping people collaborate, getting the best out of people. And sometimes when it's really high, you might find yourself being a people pleaser because you constantly want to help people or helping people to your own detriment and not really thinking about yourself. Then the left bottom part is when it's high, is testosterone. And testosterone is really focused on challenge, embracing challenges, wanting to be in control, really focus on tasks as well, or achieving tasks. And then the frontal right part is the serotonin, which is more to do with being focused on quality and high evaluation. And you might find with this, you can end up really stuck in that perfectionism syndrome where everything has to be great, everything has to be stable. Resisting change can be one of the symptoms of that. So based on this, and we know the right part of the brain actually has a lot of neurons that really enable the amygdala to be activated as well. So if the right part of the brain fires a lot in terms of the neurons, you tend to find that that person would form relationships quite easily. But someone asked me the question, does it mean that you have one or the other? No, you will have all because it's the brain. It's just that you develop some parts more than others. And you could find that you've developed about 3 of these areas very well, even 4, depending on what you're doing, but that would really be tasking on the brain. So usually you might find that either 3, 2, or even 1, depending on your role, but it can keep adapting. And what you find is this is what it would look like on the map that we evaluate. So that the red in this case is showing this person that has built a behavior pattern that is high in that serotonin area, high in the estrogen area. So this person will be really focused on task, on the quality of task, on evaluating, on finishing, and can be very operational in what they do. So that the focus is constantly getting it right before finishing, and they can end up missing deadlines quite significantly or procrastinating because they've not finished. I want to do it well, and I want to do it well. And then the blue in this case is someone who is really focused on helping people, building people up. But what you can see here, the dotted line is showing where this person is actually adapting that behavior, which is what we do so unconsciously. But the interesting thing is when you adapt a behavior away from your pattern unconsciously without knowing it, it can cause frustration. When you do it consciously, then you're in control. When you adapt above your default pattern, then that is where people tend to say a lot, cry a lot of stress and burnout. But when you're doing it consciously, you're in control. And the reason I'm showing this is because what we are then going to be looking at is how we use this whole concept of emotional intelligence, understanding our behavior pattern, understanding the behavior pattern of people we work with, just enables us to get the best out of ourselves, get the best out of people, have better team engagement, and achieve that high performance, much better and much easier once you understand pattern. Because once you understand someone's behavior pattern, then you can speak the language they will understand. Because what happens a lot of times is we talk to people in our own language. We talk to people the way we are. So for example, someone who is high in serotonin, who is focused on task, who probably speaking to a boss who is high in the green, in that dopamine area, the person who is, from serotonin will be talking facts, details, going into the nitty gritty. And the person who is in, high dopamine, you've lost them completely because they don't want detail. They're kind of all the top level, creative, problem solving ideas. So that detail, most of the time you find that they don't like it or they switch off. So in a meeting with people, it's really important to understand who they are so that you talk to them in the language that they will understand. So
Maureen,
yeah.
Do you think that we could just pause for a moment and let anyone ask questions, or just, this is so fascinating and so much information. I'm just wondering if anyone's got questions, and just before you move on, or if questions are coming up.
Okay, Robin, you in the expression quadrant. Yeah, it's really interesting once you identify, once you do this, because I just find it so fascinating, because you can see areas you've developed a lot of that you might need to tone down to enable you achieve your goal. So I'm going to wait a bit for questions or even comments about yourself or people you work with.
Feel free to unmute.
Maureen, I think that it's very interesting. You're saying that as far as communication with people, we have to communicate to them in the way that they are rather than the way that we are. So that's certainly opening up my eyes in the way that I'm in the future going to be working with clients.
Yeah, thanks, Debbie. That's so true, actually, because a lot of times it's just something natural. We kind of speak the way we are, and because that's what we're used to. But the key is to do the opposite. It's to really understand the person and then speak in their language, so that it doesn't become that you're speaking English and they're hearing Greek. And also another example is someone, the vice versa. If it's someone who is high dopamine, but whose boss is high in serotonin, in the gold area, that analysis area, when you're speaking to them, you've really got to come to the details, because if you don't do that, they will not really understand what you're saying. It will just end up getting lost in communication. Yeah.
Maureen, if I could share, no wonder you and I always seem to be on the same page when we're in different workshops and programs together, because this is the work I do too. Yet it's kind of the foundation. I don't speak in the terms of emotional intelligent words, but in the assessment work I do. And, one of the things about how assessments work inside an organization is they create a common language for the group to understand each other. So it kind of, because that's half the problem, is that we don't have a common language to understand each other. And your language and their language, a lot of discourse happens just amongst people, because as we say, all business problems are people problems. It always boils down to how people are getting along, communicating, understanding. And so does the work you do map back to its own assessment, or can it be a foundation under other types of assessments. Like I work in a number of different ones. This course is DISC. They all kind of align themselves. But so everything you're saying makes total sense. And I understand and talk to people about burnout, and they're not even aware that it's because they're stretching their natural abilities. They're in a place where after 3 months, it's not comfortable to them and they get into burnout stage, and they're utilizing or leaning on parts of themselves that have a shelf life of being able to serve them well. They haven't grown that muscles. That makes sense. So I understand when you talk about it in your language, but I'm wondering if other people here who work in different companies or with other people, even Erin, you do a lot of development and coaching work. I mean, how do you see emotional intelligence as this foundation of the work that you're doing? So I'd love to hear how people are understanding the language that Maureen is sharing with us. And does it tie back to things you're used to?
Robin, I'll build on what you said a little bit, and it's really interesting because since I am in an organization and work with a fairly large group of people all the time, I'm thinking about company culture and how you can plug this into it and how certain people feel like they can thrive in a role because their personality and tendencies and understanding of themselves can lean into what the organization would map on with this. I can see my own organization right now in healthcare philanthropy and who does especially well and really enjoys the work versus those who might be in a different area where it is kind of tiring or you're more prone to burnout because you are trying to operate in a different way. If there's a really structured organization and you're someone, I think one of the words that was on the previous slide in terms of the higher on the dopamine and exploring, flexible about time is one thing that I saw on the screen before, and feeling very relaxed and warm and spontaneous for an organization that's hyper structured and maybe falls in that top left analysis category. That might not always be a match and might cause some stress or tiredness on someone who's constantly trying to switch out what they're doing during the day. And that's what's standing out to me right now.
Excellent.
Thank you.
That was part of my question in looking at this particular print screen. If I'm, let's say, cautious and methodical, but my 3 people on my team plus my manager is forceful and decisive, and so I've adapted. So the purple line has moved more to adaptation in that area. How do I compensate for that so that I don't burn out?
If you're, for example, a good question though, if your boss or some people you're working with are in that red zone, so the more of the testosterone, the driving, the focusing, and you are adapting, it really depends on where you're adapting and where you were before. But I think the key thing to do is to really be in control of what you are doing, so that if you've got to adapt or change based on the way you work with them or the way you communicate, it's doing it consciously. It's, and that's the whole thing about being in control, that, okay, I'm doing this for now based on the people I work with, and this is the boundary that I'm setting myself, but this is what I'm going to work on to achieve this. That's the being in control. And it doesn't mean that you've got to become like them, but you just need to be able to, speak the language to understand, adapt, possibly adapt to how you work with them. But I think the key thing is telling your brain that you are doing this because of, why are you doing it? It becomes burnout when you've lost the control, when you don't have control. When the control is with somebody else, that is when it really becomes burnout. But when you are in control and doing it consciously, then it's much easier.
Can I then ask?
Go ahead.
The question in a different way.
Well, Andrea, I have some feedback for you. Do you want me to give you feedback on top of Maureen before you switch the question up?
Sure.
What I was going to say, Andrea, sorry, I didn't mean to stop you, but I'm wondering if this assists you. One of the things, as Maureen was talking, I saw it in the other side of the coin. I feel that your role, it's not about burning out you. It's also actually about coaching your team to understand where their triggers are And as they learn more about themselves, you stay in control, as Maureen is saying, but you help them become more aware of how they are showing up when it's not a good team dynamic. So it's not only about you switching to speak their language, but it's coming up, coaching them to understand what they're putting out, rather than you having to be the only one that adapts and changes to meet them. So that was what I was going to share, is that as their leader of the team, learning how to make them more emotionally intelligent as well can be a benefit to you, and not having you stretch out of your comfort zone for too long. So that was just the flip side of a way to feel like you're in control, but you're also coaching them to a better place to understand when their actions are not helping the team.
I guess part of my question is, yes, I'm in control and I've adapted, but at a certain point, I'm going to feel like I've accommodated, but nobody has accommodated for me.
Right.
So is there any advice in how to deal with that situation? Because it could be a right environment. It's just that the people that you are having to deal with are different, very different from you. Doesn't reflect on the fact that you don't like the position or the job or etc. It's that you're always the one accommodating for the other. How do you protect yourself from being damaged by that?
Well, one thing is, are you
Robin, George,
yeah, go ahead,
go on,
Maureen.
Robin.
No, I was going to say, are you managing or are you coaching? If you manage,
Well, I think it could be various role. We're all followers and leaders in our day at various times.
right.
So I don't know if it's as specific as a one-way road, but any suggestions in terms of?
I think one thing I would say is expectations a lot of times is what leads to a lot of disappointment. Because when you're in it, one thing about when you're working with a group of people is that, especially with emotional intelligence, what Robin said I like, because if you're in a position where you can coach people or work with people to get them to adapt, then you can actually do that in a very clever way. Even if you're not their leader, even if you're not in charge, you can actually do it in a clever way. But one of the things about expecting people to give back or give is where it's losing control to an extent, because you cannot control other, you can't, that expectation that you're having, they probably don't have the awareness you have. So expecting them to give, it might be pushing it, because you don't know what is in their own brain. You don't know how they are wired. You don't know the experiences they have. They, like we looked at that illusion at the beginning and we saw different things, so that, and I always said, you're looking at the same thing, but you're all seeing something different. So being in control is really being in control of yourself to an extent, then helping people to adapt as you go on based on, where people are at. But it really needs to be you deciding what you want. And most times you find that when you change or adapt, people would adapt with that, would adapt to you as well. So I know it's a tough question, but it really has to come back to how you perceive things as opposed to expecting them to give back, because they might not. Did you say, do you want Deepa to make a comment? I'm just looking at the chat before I just put up the last slide. Deepa, do you want to make a comment on that for Andrea?
Yeah, thanks for that. I think I draw a line a lot and then shut down. So that's basically, I think that's the approach I take at a point when I feel I cannot accommodate anymore. So I'm more into the all the other 3 fields other than the red zone. So it's very easy for me to move around all the other 3 zones because I naturally tend to that. And I work on the red zone. But